Joined now by our Wednesday regular, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, TSN Hockey Insider, Mr. Darren Dreger, who's quite busy at this time of year with so many managers and coaches vacancies across the NHL. How are we doing?
We're doing okay. You know, you say that, and you're right. I mean, it is very busy for all of us in this business, especially those who try and track the information hour by hour. And I don't mean this to disparage either conference final, but normally I would
disparage away. Disparage
I
away.
would be traveling and following the East or the West, and probably would have been traveling if the Edmonton Oilers had beaten the Las Vegas Golden Knights in an advance. So there's a bit of a reprieve, right? I'm not road weary, so I'm doing a lot of my work here from either the home studio or the Studio 6 at TSN, so it's okay.
Do you think the networks have called an audible here on some of that sort of discretionary travel spending, because we're not gonna break the bank here for a series that seems toast? Like if it's 2-1 in any of these series, maybe you guys are being sent here or there, but I mean, my goodness, this thing could be done here in a couple of days.
It could be, but I don't know that it has as much to do with the participants in the conference final as it does the market, the reality of the industry and the business side of what we do, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you have the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Eastern Conference Final and the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Final, of course you're going to staff them. Are you going to do what we used to do, which would be travel full panels out to cover the Leafs or the Oilers? No, probably not. So this may have made it a little bit easier, I would say, for the bean counters to make those decisions.
Do you think the NHL keeps track of the NBA? Like, do you think they are quelled, of any concern because the NBA is going through this too in their conference finals, that there is no drama anywhere in the sporting world?
No, well, I mean, I think that the National Hockey League does its level best to try and stay away from the game nights of the NBA, obviously, right? Because you have ESPN and others involved there. But they would look at the numbers, but I don't think they'd be too concerned beyond that. They would look at these conference finals and preach parity. This is parity in its finest.
Well, I think they were certainly rooting for the Miami Heat last night. It would have been a dry week, dark week for basketball.
Right.
And that was not the case. And look, Darren, you don't have to disparage the conference final because there are so many people doing that for you across the hockey world.
You know what, fellas? Just a quick thought on that. Mm-hmm. I like the storylines on across the board, really. I guess the only one that's a bit of a surprise is Dallas. Vegas has been a terrific story since they were introduced as an expansion team in the NHL. So credit to the owner, credit to management for doing whatever is necessary to put them in this position. And then you look at the East, the Carolina Hurricanes have been a good team all year long. They've dealt with a ton of adversity. They're dealing with it now. And then you've got the momentum, which might be the most impactful ingredient there is to hoisting that Stanley Cup that now belongs to the Florida Panthers. Momentum I'm talking about here. I mean, they barely squeaked into the playoffs, and here they are. One win, perhaps tonight, from a trip to the Stanley Cup final.
We did the story earlier in the show. If the Blackhawks lose to the Penguins on April 11th, Florida is not in the postseason, and four different franchises have their futures changed. Okay, well, let's get at it, Darren. It was 3 weeks ago, and it's my first time talking to you in 3 weeks, so thanks for dealing with
the pictures. You had a great time.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Couldn't find sunscreen anywhere.
Post pictures, and then they take them and co-opt them for their own evil purposes. You told us that Patrick Allvin was looking to make a deal, that he was in a lot of contact with the non-playoff teams because they were idle too, and hoping to get something done here even before the end of the 23 season. Update on that, sir, if any.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet according to my Canucks sources. That's not to say that something can't develop. We know that. But, Allvin is established with now a growing list of non-playoff teams that the Vancouver Canucks are open for business. And, I feel like we kind of retread the tire when we talk about this week after week because we know what specifically Vancouver is looking for. But then you look for match, and, there are teams that are equally eager to do business. Danny Briere and the Philadelphia Flyers are trying to move bodies. I don't think that they have the pieces that the Vancouver Canucks would have interest in, like Kevin Hayes or Tony DeAngelo. But what if Travis Sanheim were to be officially available? There's speculation around this guy, and his mega contract kicks in, but I don't know, maybe there's something there. And the Minnesota Wild connections never seem to go away in relation to the Vancouver Canucks. So I think that there's just a healthy, constant communication with Alvin that could drift right up to the draft when maybe we're talking about something more substantial and more urgent.
There's some dots connected in Chicago. Some reporting there that they would want to perhaps move up, perhaps acquire talent around Connor Bedard. Where are you on that theory? That they want to surround Connor Bedard right now, or do they want to do the Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews two-step again here and try to get good young talent for Connor Bedard in next year's draft?
Yeah. I think a little of both, and I know that's not answering the question, but that makes the most sense to me, and I have not had a conversation about this with Kyle Davidson, so I'm going off some of the reporting that you guys are. You got to be careful when you're trying to expedite a process here. But in saying that, you have to also be mindful of making sure that Bedard is insulated by good talent and players that are going to give him the flexibility and time to develop. And you want to keep that environment as healthy as you can. It would not do the Chicago Blackhawks any favor whatsoever, or Connor Bedard, if they take it on the chin night after night after night. And some of the weaknesses that he legitimately is going to have as a fresh face NHL rookie don't need to be exposed shift after shift after shift. I mean, again, you don't want to necessarily ease him in. We know he's going to be an NHL player. You just want to make sure that he's insulated and protected. So I do think that Kyle Davidson is going to be active, but if he's adding bigger pieces, I also think that those pieces are going to have to be age sensitive and pieces that he can build around to help Connor Bedard for not only a year or two, but maybe for years to come.
Have you heard anything about the Canucks trading back from the number 11 to rid themselves of a bad contract?
I haven't, but that would not surprise me at all because those conversations are underway with other teams. Not connected to Vancouver, but other teams that, maybe aren't in the top 5 that are exploring some of the interest. When you've got contracts that you feel like you want and need to move to acquire cap space, well, what are you giving up to do that? I mean, you have to give something. Now, when we look at the players that we're talking about here, these guys aren't cast-off players. These are good NHL players. So there has to be a hockey commodity that's attached to that. I haven't heard it specifically from the Vancouver Canucks, so I'm not going to verify or confirm, but it does make sense to me that they would have those conversations. But those are conversations that you would have through normal practice. Even if you didn't have an issue with the cap, right? You would have that conversation based on where the Canucks are positioned about the idea of moving up, moving down. What are you interested in? You collect all your information and the number of teams that are willing to consider it. Then you kind of park it for a while, and then that resurfaces the week leading up to the trade deadline, and then before the draft, the week leading up to the draft, and then the evening before the first round. That's when those decisions normally are presented. When you're talking about moving up in the draft to that level.
One of the things I miss about working the draft, being at the draft, is that night before in the hotel lobby where I see the likes of Dreger and others
percolating.
Oh, absolutely, because that's when the Pierre-Luc Dubois is going 3rd overall. That's when you start to hear the real juicy stuff.
We've been
draft day.
We've been talking about the nuclear options for the Canucks. If they can't facilitate a hockey trade that gives them the cap space, they've got the certain nuclear option of the OEL buyout, which helps them immediately for next year, and then punitive for 7 years.
Yeah.
Is the other
helps them for 2 years. I've been telling you, that's 2 big cap savings for 2 years, and then
it's still a $2 million cap hit. But the other option is the trade down, which is a little less punitive in that you would ostensibly still have a first-round pick just a few spots down. How nuclear is that option versus maybe primary option?
Well, unless something has changed with ownership, the latter is more palatable, I believe.
Yeah,
trading down, because look, even though the Canucks, like every other team that missed the playoffs, are in draft and development mode, they're also in a place where they need to contend for a playoff spot. They feel like they should be able to contend for a playoff spot. And the other thing that we know And I was reminded of this recently. So unless Jim Rutherford and Patrick Galvin have convinced the Aquilinis that money on the books for players who don't play for you anymore is not a bad thing, that seems like a bit of a stretch, because we know the Aquilinis historically do not want dead money on the books. So it would seem more likely, maybe worst case, last case scenario, they explore the buyout option, but that still feels like a long shot at this stage.
And as you note, Darren, and we did so day of the draft lottery, at pick number 11, you've missed out on the first tier or even the first few tiers of top prospects. You may very well have the guy you're going to take at number 11 ranked with a big pool of guys. It's a natural trade down spot to begin with. So
I'm not so sure that's right, though, this year, Matt, because, I mean, when you get to 10, 11, this is a pretty good draft. It is. It's certainly top heavy. They all are. And you have a special player and influence here in Connor Bedard. But the messaging that I'm getting, and you guys should have Bob McKenzie on, he is the guru of this stuff, is that, you know, in that 10 to 15 slot, you're getting a very good first round pick. But you have your whiteboard, right? You've got your data collected on where you want this player slotted. If that player if that's why you wait until the eve, or in certain cases right before a player is picked, right? If your player all of a sudden mysteriously gets picked 6th and you had him pegged for 11, well, maybe you got to get into scramble mode and now you draft down because the rest of the group of players is just, you're fine, but you're going to get a similar player down at 15 or even as low as 20. But this year's draft is pretty deep.
Good. Our old friend Travis Green, heard his name associated with both Calgary and Columbus. What do you know there?
Yeah. Well, it's early in Calgary, right? Travis should be on that list. If you're Craig Conroy and you're looking for experience, and they need experience, I think, in Calgary, given everything that they went through this past year, and they're likely going to go through again here. Although it does feel like this is going to be a rebound year for the Calgary Flames, because a lot of the stuff that they needed to move out, they've moved out. And they've got, new vision, even though Craig Conroy is obviously connected to Brad Treliving and regimes of the past. But he's his own thinker. And I loved what I heard from Craig Conroy in his media availability yesterday. And the fact that, he feels like they made a mistake by not getting something for Johnny Gaudreau and letting that guy just walk into free agency. So they're going to attach that same sort of due diligence with a coaching hire. I connected Gerard Gallant to the Calgary Flames because of the level of experience, because he's got an unreal relationship with Jonathan Huberdeau. And that matters, right? I mean, Jonathan Huberdeau has to get comfortable and he has to be productive. Otherwise, the Calgary Flames are going to have a tough go. So then you look beyond Turk, Gerard Gallant. And that's where I see Travis Green. And that's where I see Andrew Burnett, and that's where I see some others. But, they'll look internally as well with Mitch Love, who did a good job with the Calgary Wranglers of the American Hockey League. But Travis Green most definitely is in those conversations.
Speaking of coaching, the names Mike Babcock and Joel Quenneville have resurfaced here. Dregs, what do you know there?
Well, look, I feel like Mike Babcock is going to be on a bench next season. I do. As Pierre LeBrun and Aaron Portzline reported out of Columbus, he interviewed there. I believe Peter Laviolette interviewed there. Pascal Vincent is an internal candidate. Andrew Burnett, I believe, interviewed in Columbus yesterday. Burnett is now making the rounds. But I'm not saying that Columbus is going to hire Mike Babcock or Mike Babcock will select Columbus. It just feels like he's poised to get back into the NHL. Right now he's hunting, I believe, in South Africa. I mean, why wouldn't he be? He was on a family vacation, then he turned that into a hunting excursion. So he's living his best life, but I do think he's going to be on the bench. As for Joel Quenneville, that one's more complicated for obvious reasons. And this one is a bit strange in the bigger picture. So the original sense was that Joel was going to have to wait until maybe July, August to get cleared by the National Hockey League. And then as I reported last week, the league shifted And as soon as the cup is handed over, Quenneville is going to meet with Gary Bettman. If he gets approval, then he can interview for jobs. He can accept jobs. Conversely, we know that Stan Bowman interviewed for the Calgary GM job. In fact, I know that Bowman has interviewed or talked to several NHL clubs, but the difference being that he was allowed to interview but couldn't accept an NHL job and still can't without NHL approval. So the Quenneville situation is a bit unique and different than the others.
The managing situations, is Kyle Dubas going to want to manage after this drama in Toronto?
Yeah.
There's talk that Pittsburgh's put him at the top of their list, but you need the guy to actually want to keep working. And part of that press conference that Brendan Shanahan analyzed or overanalyzed or what have you was him saying he just, this is taking a big toll on his family. So where do you suspect he goes, if anywhere?
Yeah, well, if anywhere, might be exactly what this turns into. Again, if you go back to Kyle Dubas's media availability last Monday, 10 days or so ago, he acknowledged it was Toronto or nothing. Well, obviously things changed because he was let go by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that probably changes the thinking. In fact, not probably, it does. And, the day he was let go, his agent, also told the Maple Leafs that he was willing to continue to be the general manager. The parameters of what they discussed in terms of the money and the autonomy and all of that had also shifted a little bit. And the Toronto Maple Leafs just said, no, we're going to go in a different direction. But Kyle has not surfaced other than the statement that he made on social media. And what was interesting about that statement was how he headlined it by saying onward, right? So, as a family, are they moving on from the Toronto Maple Leafs? And if so, are they willing to consider diving right back into the pressure pit that is being an NHL general manager? And fellas, let me submit this. If Kyle decides he's going to take a break, I would not blame him 1 second. He will be a general manager again in the National Hockey League. But think of this. You go from the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Pittsburgh Penguins, where there is a messy amount of work that needs to get done. Do you want to be the general manager that has to tell Sidney Crosby, yeah, guess what? You're probably not making the playoffs again in the remainder of your career because we're going into full rebuild mode? Or Evgeny Malkin, or Chris Letang, or even worse, have the conversation with these people via their agents. We'd consider trading you if you're interested in chasing a Stanley Cup. You're going through the Taves and the Kane thing all over again. And as iconic as Kane and Taves are, they're not Sidney Crosby. They're not Sidney Crosby. So maybe there's a part of that spooks Kyle a little bit as well. But he would be high, or as you guys say, at the top of the list if he's interested in going to Pittsburgh.
What do you make of he may be a candidate for the new Ottawa Senators ownership group and take vengeance on the Ontario Battle of Ontario?
I've got time for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's salacious. We love it from a media standpoint. I mean, hey, look, anything is possible. I guess what I would wonder is, which group is going to win the bid? If it's the Kimmel family, is there a connection there? I don't know. If it's Michael Andlauer, as many of us suspect, I thought it was going to be Andlauer from day one, just because of the connections of Michael Andlauer. He's joined at the hip, or has been traditionally, with Steve Staios, right? Staios was his guy in Hamilton with the Hamilton Bulldogs of the Ontario Hockey League. They're connected. Let's just leave it that way. So I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but then you have to also look at the work that Pierre Dorion has done. If I'm new ownership, I'm looking at Pierre and I'm giving Pierre credit for everything that he's had to wade through, the slop that he has had to deal with for a long, long time. He's a very capable general manager, so I may not be as so hasty.
Marvelous stuff, Darren. Thank you for the time here. We will catch up next Wednesday.
Okay, guys. Have a good one.